Hey, John, do you remember how last week we started the podcast talking about your pledge drive?
I do, yes. Yeah, that was the beginning of February.
Yeah, it wasn't last week; it was last month. Surprise! This month's podcast is going to be completely the same, but we're gonna talk about the no pun included Kickstarter a little bit at the start of it. If that's okay with our audience, is that okay, audience? I heard you
Yeah,
say
I think that's
yes.
great. Yeah, let's do it. All right, so cool.
Yeah,
That sounded
cool.
resounding to me.
Yeah. Hi. If you don't know who we are, I am Efka, and today with me is John, as always, and we both have our YouTube channels where we do board game related stuff, reviews, and other things. So our channel, the channel that I am on, which is a channel run by me and my wife Elaine, no pun included, is having a Kickstarter right now. And if you're watching this on YouTube, you are watching it on our YouTube channel. So yeah, that's how you got here. This Kickstarter is really important to us because we have an approach to professional board game reviews that are also entertaining at the same time. And when I say professional, I mean, gosh golly, we dedicate all our free time and not free time, all the time available to just give you the best, most rounded coverage of a game possible. So if you value that in this hobby, in this very small niche hobby, you should know that there isn't a lot of money in this hobby and we need your support. So if you want us to continue on as we were, please go and pledge on our Kickstarter and we will be so eternally grateful. John, how was that for a pitch? Was that good?
That was pretty good. You should probably mention when it ends.
It ends in, I don't know when this goes live, but in probably about a week's time. So,
Okay, well, you don't have like the date memorized, like burned into your brain,
uh,
fiery numbers.
no, I don't actually. I just see a countdown of like that many days left. And in my head, I go, oh no, but we're not there yet.
Doing rough math for you, I think it'll probably be around the 13th or the 14th of April, somewhere around there.
Somewhere around there.
So yeah, it's once again been a minute since we've done this. I guess we've been doing this about every 5 to 6 weeks lately. It may be nice to do it quicker, but man, we just have so much going on.
Yes, absolutely. We are very busy people, and this podcast is a labor of love. So if you enjoy it, please be patient. We'll try and get back to it being more frequent.
It's true. It's true. It's a great excuse to hang out with a friend too.
Hmm.
Anyway, we're going to talk about some games. The first one you brought up, right?
I am so excited to talk about this. Yes. It's a game called High Society, and spoilers, I love it. It's so good.
So this is a really, really new game. It looks like it came out. Oh, math is hard. In 1995, a long time ago.
It did come out a long time ago, and although board game enthusiasts will definitely recognize the designer's name, Reiner Knizia, ex-investment banker turned board game designer, made over 600 board games, apparently. Apparently, that is a real number. And some of them perhaps not so good, but he's also known for some astoundingly renowned classics. And he's not done yet because just last year he got nominated for Spiel des Jahres. Spiel des Jahres? That's how you pronounce it? I believe it is.
Yeah.
By any means, no slouch. Reiner Knizia does what he does best, which is takes a mechanism and just boils it down to its most basic components. And I will tell you right now that High Society is the simplest auction game that I have ever played. And I think I can safely say it is the best auction game that I have ever played.
So what's the pitch? I've never actually encountered this one, even though it's 23 years old. Haha, I did the math. So it's super simple. What kind of auction is it? And what are you doing?
What you're doing is you're a bunch of layabouts and dilettantes, and you have a lot of money, and you like to prove to each other that you buy just the most well-regarded things that are just of the highest value, and you possess these things just because you can, because you have enough money to waste on them. And so what happens is you have a deck of cards. And these cards are things you're going to be bidding on. And they're either like a fancy vacation or, like a rare and expensive piece of art. And the way they're represented in the game is they're basically numbered from 1 to 10. And they're the victory points you're scoring at the end of the game. So
Okay.
it's like you're bidding for a victory point, or you're bidding for 2 victory points. But do you know what? The game is so simple that it's nice to get embroiled into this theme, right? And it's almost shameful to deconstruct it into, well, that's just a victory point, but that's what it is. And at the same time, you kind of want it to be a little bit more, even though you recognize that behind that, it's just mechanisms, right?
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so you're bidding for these things, right? So let's say you'll draw a new auction round starts, and you'll draw the top card of the deck, and it'll say 4, right? And you're like, okay, right now we're bidding for 4 victory points, right? Because the person with the most victory points at the end of the game wins. Revolutionary, I know, right?
Right.
And so you have a hand of money, right? And you literally have a hand of money. So you start the game, everyone starts with the same amount of money. But money is cards, right? And there are specific denominations. So you have 1,000 francs, 2,000 francs, 3,000 francs, 4,000, then 6, then 8, then 10, 12, 15, 20, and 25, I believe, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if it's your turn, you can bid on this piece of art or whatever it is that's worth 4 points by playing a card from your hand that is worth however much money you like, right? And then the next person has to also bid by playing a card from their hand that is higher than that, right? And they could do a combination. So for example, if I bid 4,000 francs, they could combine 3,000 and 2,000 for 5,000 francs, right? But that's 2 cards out of your hand already, right? And then, or you could pass. You could say, I am no longer bidding, and you can pass at any point as long as the auction is still going, even though, for example, it came back to me, and now the bidding is like 8,000, and I'll put in another 10, bringing up to like 12,000 or whatever, or I could pass. And if I pass, I get to take all the money back into my hand. But if I don't pass, if I keep going, the auction keeps ratcheting up, and eventually everybody passes until one person has to buy it for whatever they bid. And for reasons I haven't yet explained, this is almost always an excruciating moment, because High Society is a game about greed. And no matter what you do in this game, you are being too greedy. Even if you're being very reserved and careful, you are being too greedy by not spending enough money. It's just like this overarching motif, right? Which makes it incredibly thematic for a Reiner Knizia game. Because here's the thing. So if you win this thing, you have to basically give up those cards. They're no longer in your hand. You've spent that money. Whereas everyone who passed gets to return their money back to their hand, and they have it. And the very important kicker in the game is that the person who spent the most money at the end of the game, regardless of how many points they have, is the person that immediately loses.
Oh, I was waiting for a catch, because so far I'm like, okay, auction, spending money, have the most, all right, and that's it.
That's the catch.
That's it. You don't you have to hoard your money while also getting good things, or not spend the most.
Kind of. So there's actually like this extra little layer, right? So I mentioned the 10 cards, which are 1 to 10 victory points. There's a few other things that you bid on. So from time to time, a multiplier will come out, right? And it literally doubles your score, right? And there are 3 multipliers, and if you get like 2 of the multipliers, it quadruples your score. And if you get all of the multipliers, it 8 times your multiples. Octuples?
Octopus? It octopuses your score.
It octopuses your score, yeah, effectively, right? And so there's a lot of variation there, but the best twist in this game is when a negative card comes out, and you still have to fight for this card, except what you're doing is you're fighting not to take that card, right? And this is so funny, because what it does to the table is immediately, you never know when it's going to come out. There's like 3 negative cards. There's a card that halves your score. There's a card that makes you give up one of the not bonus cards, like positive cards that you acquired. And there's also a card that just minus 5 points, right?
Yeah.
And as soon as that comes out, everyone just like puts their hands on their head, because they all know like, oh, we're going to spend a lot of money. All of us are going to spend a lot of money now. And we've just spent so much money like getting this thing, because like someone put out a 10-point card, and you're like, 10 points. We're going to fight for this a lot, because even though you might not like want to try and win this card, You know, like this 10 points, because you know, like people are going to overvalue it and they're going to bid too much money, right? You're still bidding on it because you're trying to get the score to go higher, right? Like the cost of that card to go higher.
If it's a negative, though, wouldn't everyone just pass? Like, I don't understand why you'd be spending money on a negative.
Exactly. So the way it works when you have a negative card is that everybody's bidding not to take it, right?
Oh, I see. I see.
The person that is the first to pass takes the card, but they don't pay anything. Everyone else pays everything they've already bid to not take
So it's
it.
a different auction in that moment. It's first to pass. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
And so you're all like, you know, I just you always spend money in this game, like no matter what you do, and the moments when you don't spend money, you regret it because you're like, I should have probably bid on that because it went for just a little less than I thought it would, or you're just trying to you force another player to spend more money, and instead of them spending more money, they just go, do you know what? Nah, I'll pass. You pay for it. And you're like, oh God.
Yeah.
Right. And it's a game just full of these moments. And I never found it dull.
How long does it take to play?
About 15 minutes.
Okay. So how many money cards do you start the game with?
You start with so you have 1, 2, 3, 4. I think you have 5 and 6, and then you have 8, 10, 12, 15, 20, and 25.
So like 10-ish cards.
Yeah, something like that.
And that's all you have for the whole game.
Yeah, that's all you have for the whole game. And
oh, okay.
There's this really funny moment where you're bidding small amounts and you're like, oh, this is fine. Like, I'm only spending like very little of the money. But then you realize that a card comes out and it's like a 4, and you wouldn't mind bidding on a 4 because everyone's already spent their money, so they don't have a lot of money, and you're like, I'll pick up a cheap 4 points. But all the cards you have left are like 10, 12,
right.
20, and you're like, no, I don't want to spend any of these, right? And so this funny hand management thing going on as well. Every angle you attack the game from is just so amusing and so fun and always so unexpected. And no matter what you do, you always think like, okay, I'm gonna be smart about this. But the game proves to you, like, over and over and over again, that hey, you're not smart and you're too greedy.
So I just looked it up, and it seems like there's like 13 or so versions of this game out. Do you have the
Yes.
most recent version?
I do have the most recent version, and it's from Osprey Games. They were very kind to send me a copy, and let me tell you, John, it is the prettiest version, without a doubt.
Looking on Board Game Geek, the cover looks gorgeous. I can't see any images of the cards themselves, but I'm assuming it has a similar, I don't know, very like 1920s deco style thing going on. It looks most of the other versions I'm seeing in the images don't look great, but this cover looks gorgeous.
Yeah, so all of the artwork in that game is as good as that cover.
Awesome.
I know, right? So yeah, it's a really pretty version, and the cards you bid for are oversized. They're a very funny size. They're like, have you ever seen oversized Magic the Gathering cards?
No.
So for those who have, they're about that size, right? So I think if you take a Magic card and, you know, make it ×2 bigger, you know, in terms of scale,
Okay.
that's about the size that, not 2 cards put together, but more like, you know, ×2, if that makes sense.
Okay. All right. Cool. Well, I'm not usually crazy about auction games, but I like it when an auction game has a very small amount of resources. Like Raw is probably my favorite auction game right now because you have just a couple of these things, these tokens you're auctioning with, and so the idea of having a depleting supply of money in your hand and not starting with that many means I would probably enjoy this one more. I think I'd probably enjoy this one.
I think you would, and especially because it's like such a quick game. It's just one of those games that you always want to have in your backpack when you go to board game evenings,
Okay.
because so many times you find yourself like, oh, you know, we've got like 15 minutes when we want to deflate. What shall we do? High society, because I took it once to our board game club, and it immediately became the de facto, like, what shall we play now? We've got some time. It's high society.
Cool. All right. Well, the next game that we're going to talk about is one that I've played and you have not. And technically, I haven't played the official version of it. So this is called Teotihuacan. And do you know anything about this at this point, Efka?
Is it something to do with Tolkien?
Yes. Zolkin, the Mind Calendar, came out like 6 or 7 years ago. It's the worker placement game with a bunch of moving gears on the board, if you are familiar with it at all. And this game, Teotihuacan, has the same designer, Danielle Tashini, and it's,
Hmm.
I believe, supposed to be kind of a thematic sequel. It's also set in Central America-ish, and it's also kind of a worker placement game, but there are no gears going on here. It's a very different beast.
Hmm. Okay.
Is that all you know? It's like similar to the Zolkin, that's it?
Yeah, that's pretty much all I knew. That it's one of the designers involved, and that it's gonna have like a spiritual succession rather than any actual mechanical succession to the game.
Okay, so let me fill you in.
All right.
So I went to the Gamma Trade Show 3 weeks ago or so, and I got to play a bunch of different board games there. And one of them was, well, I heard through the grapevine that there was a prototype version of Teotihuacan there, from NSKN Games. They're gonna be releasing it around Spiel. They said October, of this year.
Hmm.
And so, I heard they were gonna be, showing it at a game night, and I got to the game night early. I found their table that said NSKN Games on it, and I sat down, and I literally stayed there and talked to a couple people as they came and went for over an hour while I waited for them, because I think they got caught up in the trade hall, to come over there to play the game, because it was realistically the only game I wanted to play that night. And the
Hmm.
reason I was so excited about it is because, well, it's a medium to heavyweight Euro game from Danielle Tashini, who makes board games that I really like. I mean, if you've seen my review of Zolkin, you'll know that I wanted to love it, but I had a couple of issues with it. But I think it was still had some really cool stuff going on. And when I first saw the some prototype images of this game, I just knew I was super intrigued, because it's one of those Euro style games with just bits and icons and stuff all over the place. Like, it's this huge board,
Hmm.
and I really wanted to try it. So right now I'm looking at the Board Game Geek page for it, and just to give you a preamble into what I'm about to mention, under mechanisms it says there's area movement, point to point movement, set collection, tile laying, variable player powers, and worker placement. So and the category is ancient. So there's
That's a very sexy list of mechanisms, John.
yeah, there's a lot of good stuff going on here. So, what's actually happening from a mechanical perspective is this is a rondelle game, and if you're not familiar with rondelles, the idea of that is you have a circular type pattern out on the board, and you have pieces on that circle, and on your turn, you go around the circle, activating actions. This is a neat way to have action selection, because usually you can only move a certain number of spaces forward. So as you are going around this clock, so to speak, if you start at noon, then you can maybe only do 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, or 3 o'clock. You don't have access to 6 or 7 o'clock until a couple turns later when you move your pawn around. So Teotihuacan uses this rondelle idea, but it starts off with a randomized rondelle, because you have these 8 different boards that you shuffle up, and then you put them around the main board in the middle of the table, and that will be the racetrack essentially that your workers are going to be going on.
Would it be fair to compare rondelle to members of our audience who don't necessarily know what a rondelle is to being on a merry-go-round, but you are spinning on the merry-go-round and you're trying to grab the cotton candy from the people standing and watching you go on the merry-go-round? Uh, and in this game, you're saying that the cotton candy is randomized, so you don't necessarily you can't learn the layout, right?
Sure, yeah, let's go with the merry-go-round
Yeah.
analogy. Yeah, so what it means is that each time you play the game, the stuff is all going to be in different places, because there's 8 different spots to go to, and like some of them give you resources, some of them allow you to buy tiles for resources to put into a pyramid, some of them allow you to decorate the pyramid, some of them give you these game-breaking abilities that only you have access to until somebody else also buys into actually taking that ability. And where these things all are is going to make the game very different each time you play. Now, I only played it one full time. It was at 4 players, and again, it was a prototype. It was a good-looking prototype, but when we finished up the game, they mentioned that they're still tweaking it. They're going to be balancing some things here and some things there. But this is a kind of game where you like the actions seem simple, but the strategy was something I was really enjoying. Like, I was having so much fun playing this game because there are 8 of these boards, and you have 3 workers out in the middle on these boards. And on your turn, all you do is pick up one of those workers, and you move it up to 3 boards down. And your workers are actually dice, but you never roll them. They're just counters, essentially. They start the game at a value of 1, and whenever they do actions, more often than not, you will get a upgrade with it, and that means you will be changing one of the dice that you have over there to be 1 pip value higher. And some of the boards will give you extra benefits if you activate them with high-powered dice, but other boards don't. So you can kind of prioritize. Like, you can send your low-powered dice to boards where it doesn't really matter what the power is, and send your high-powered ones to boards where it really does matter. But another thing to keep in mind is that, like most Euro games out there, there are moments where you have to feed your people, and the higher power they are, the more cacao they have to eat. And I love that in this game, it's not actually food that you're feeding people. You're just trading back and forth, essentially chocolate.
Okay. Chocolate.
Yeah. I mean, cacao, technically. I guess that turns into chocolate. And this is the main resource, and you have to actually spend it when you go to spots where other people are. So it has all of these things to think about. Like, if you want to activate this one particular location, you are going to want to get multiple dice onto it because there's a little chart. And like, the more dice you have and the more powerful they are, the more wood or gold you get out of that specific spot. But on other spots, you want to go to them and have a bunch of this wood or gold saved up to spend it to do various other things. And then there, in the middle of the board, if you're familiar with Zolkin, there are these tracks that are similar to the temple tracks that were in Zolkin. And as you do a variety of things out on the main board, like all these things I've already talked about, you're going to be moving yourself up these tracks, and each track is going to give you something different. Like, it might just be points, or it might be extra chocolate, or maybe it is a couple of resources, or even like a little bit of a score multiplier thing going on. And on each one of those tracks, you randomly put out these big score bonus tiles, which is going to be different every single time you play. And so you can kind of, it's one of those games where when you first sit down to play it, you need to look at the randomization of the rondelle, the randomization of the not asymmetric at the start, but the player powers that you can buy into, as well as the randomization of these big scoring tiles on all these different tracks, and figure it out. Be like, okay, I think this game, that's a really good combo I see out there. I'm going to try and do this to really run up that one particular track, because when I get to that top, I'm going to score for these masks that I've been picking up, and that's going to give me a whole bunch of points. And it's definitely a strategy game in that ilk, but I mentioned that it's a worker placement style game, but the only penalty you have for going to a place where somebody else is you have to pay cacao to the bank when there are other dice there. And you have to pay cacao for your dice too. Like, if you do a big activation with lots of your dice on a spot, you have to keep paying the penalty for your own spots there. So it definitely has that a bit of indirect player interaction as you're maybe trying to take things away from other people, but you can always go to the locations that you necessarily want to. It just depends on how much money you want to spend for it.
It sounds like a game that requires... So the first time you're probably going to be playing it, you're probably going to be tackling the whole rondelle mechanism and how that works and how the action selection works. And the more and more you play it, you're probably going to benefit from learning about all these bonus tiles and just how good they are, and, evaluating the random placement nature of these tiles. And like, okay, so I know what this does and how this would affect me, and what I need to do to get to it. So it's probably a game that's if it is actually enjoyable to play, which I don't know because I've never played it. It sounds like it's gonna have a lot of repeat play value. Would that be a fair estimation, do you think?
I mean, that's my hope. It does seem like, on the face of it, and after playing it once, that the variability is going to be pretty high for this one. And I agree. Like, this is a game where I took a photo of it and I posted it to Twitter, and I got a lot of people posting back like, "Wow, it looks like a lot of stuff is going on there." Like, there's just tokens and bits and icons all over the place. So this is certainly going to be a little bit overwhelming for most people as they sit down. Like, depending on how comfortable you are with heavy Euro games, it'll be less overwhelming. But even if the first time you play this game, you're going to probably be focusing, like you said, on the rondelle, like getting kind of the basic stuff. And we actually finished the whole game, and not a single one of us got high enough on any of those tracks to get the big score modifiers. And when we finished the game, we all kind of were sitting there chatting with the publisher because, they're mentioning, we're going to tweak this and tweak that. And at one point, somebody mentioned something offhand, like, oh, it seemed really hard to do X or to get points for that, for Y. And the publisher looked over and he's like, none of you guys took these tokens. Like, look at these tokens. This token would give you like 30 points. This token would give you like 27 points. And none of you guys got to that. Like this is unusual. Like, people usually go for these. And I was like, you know what? On a second play, I get it. Like, I think I would absolutely be like, okay, I'm not going to go a little bit on all 5 of these tracks. I'd be like, these are the 2 I'm going to go hard on. I'm going to be the first one to get to the top of that one and take that huge bonus. And that's just outside of your strategic thinking, I think, when the first time you sit down and play this game, which I think hopefully adds depth to the game. Now, I've only played this prototype. Obviously, it's not done. It's going to be coming out later on this year. But I can't also say if it's a good game or not. But I can say that I am very hopeful that it's going to be a good game because I really enjoyed that first play. And of course, it takes multiple plays to really see if there are things that just aren't working in some way or another. And I was definitely a bit, um, the shininess of it was
Yeah.
a factor that I need to keep in mind. Like I was so excited to be playing this new game and like and all this stuff going on. Like you have to play it a couple times to kind of take off the blinder glasses and be like, okay, is this actually good? And I'm hoping that it is.
Well, there's something to be said about the first play being always exploratory. It's not surprising to me that, you all kind of like spread yourselves out between all the things that you could do in this game because you are effectively, like poking and prodding things and going, what does this do? What
Yeah.
does that do? And um, I'm wondering, I've lately been on this sort of like almost reevaluation of why I like Eurogames, and for me, a lot about Eurogames is the sort of sense of discovery as I try to learn these systems, right? And I think the metal of a really good Eurogame is the one that doesn't lose that shine and wonder once you learn it, right? Like where
Hmm.
it's still as exciting to discover like what you're doing and how that works. I'm not like it's a funny thing to say discover what you're doing, but it is exactly what I mean. I mean like the learning of the effect of your actions, right? And I feel like there are so many games that in the past I viewed positively, Eurogame specifically, that I wouldn't anymore because I feel like once the glean has worn off, there's like that sort of like competitiveness left, right? And there's a reason this podcast is called that. For us, I think we like both of us like playing games because we like discovering new games, and I know you as much as me are into playing a lot of board games just to see the next thing, the new thing, and I'm wondering how much of that is competitiveness and how much of that is actually just like the sense of discovery, and so very few games manage to achieve that, where like yeah, I've played it a bunch of times, but I still feel like I'm discovering things and I'm learning. Versus, like I've learned how the systems of the game work, and now I'm just going to be trying to do this because I know that works, and then this is going to loop into this strategy or whatever, and kind of rinsing and repeating that rote action.
For sure. Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I also really love exploring new things. I mean, that's part of the reason why I've been Cult of the New type person for a lot longer than I've been making YouTube videos.
Mm,
And, going back to a game we talked about just a minute ago, Zulk in the Mayan Calendar,
yes.
I was blown away the first time I played that game. I just like these gears, they actually moved, and the longer you didn't touch your workers, the more powerful they got, and the way you plan multiple turns ahead to like pull off these certain combos, like I was just floored. The first time I played this game, I think hopping up and down with excitement, probably similar to my excitement as Teotihuacan, if not actually more in that case. But again, if you've seen my review, you know that after I played it a few more times, it got to the point where I didn't want to play it anymore for a variety of reasons, and I'm not going to rehash my review right now. But I think part of it was because I felt like I got to the point where I had seen the dominant strategies, and I was like, okay,
Mm,
well, which one of the dominant strategies am I going to play today? And I've had people comment on that video who have played, I've played the game, I think 6 or 7 times, something like that. And I had people comment who've probably played the game 30 times and like, no, there's so many more layers and there's all these hybrid strategies that you can go for. And I'm sure they're right. Like I
yeah.
don't think I in any way actually plumbed the depths, but to a certain extent, I felt like I picked up as much as I thought I was going to while still having fun, and the game lost that gleam from it. And I think maybe part of that also was because that game had this really unusual gear mechanic. And so in Teotihuacan, I think it has less of a arguably gimmicky mechanic thing going
Hmm.
on. It just seems like it has a lot of solid Euro mechanics. And then the variable rondelle is definitely kind of a newer thing, and the dice that the increase in value is something that has not been done that many times. So I think hopefully this is like a a meatloaf kind of game where you take like a whole bunch of different ingredients, mix them all together, and then you have something really tasty at the end.
I like
I
meatloaf.
yeah, I certainly enjoyed it after my first play. So I'm really looking forward to the official real version of this coming out later in October. And have I done a decent job of getting you excited for this one, Hefka, or are you just kind of feeling middling about it?
I will tell you what. If this meatloaf is good, it will be the first good meatloaf from NSKN games that I have enjoyed. So I am hopeful, very, very hopeful.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. Well, we'll get back to the one in a few months.
Listen, John, I couldn't help but notice that recently when Board Game Geek was at the Gamma trade show and they were live streaming, there was a certain person on the live stream that I recognized wearing a Board Game Geek jersey, and that person is W. Eric Martin. But also you were there.
Yeah. Yeah, I mentioned I went there, but the main reason I went was to help volunteer at the Board Game Geek live stream booth.
Yeah, and at one point, I was watching this live stream, John, and at one point, W. Eric Martin taught you a game called The Mind that looked very, very interesting and exciting. Can you tell me more about that game and its telepathic abilities?
Yes, I can. This one is a much simpler affair than Teotihuacan because, well, the mind is almost not a game at all because what it is it's a deck of 100 cards. And at the beginning of the game, you're going through a series of levels, and you start at level 1, and you deal 1 card out to every player equal to, or cards equal to the level. So it's level 1, you deal 1 card out to every player.
And that card could be anything between a 1 and 100, right?
Exactly, yeah. There's 100 cards, and they are each unique. And then you need to play the cards in order. It's a cooperative game, but you're not allowed to communicate in any way.
So what would happen is I would look in your eyes, and then at any point I would decide I'm going to play my card now, and it's going to say 36, and then you're going to be like, "Oh, I had a 47, so that's fine."
Yep.
And if it was the other way around, we would lose.
Yeah, well, you have a certain number of lives. So, yeah, you would lose a life. And as you go deeper into the game, like let's say we did it correct. You played 36 and I played a 47. And we're like, yay, we high five. And then we go to level 2. So at that point, we each get 2 cards. And then we need to play these 4 cards total in order. And then we get to level 3 and level 4. And as you hit certain levels, you get bonuses. You gain new lives because you're invariably going to be losing some.
John, how many levels are there?
So it depends on the player count. In a 2-player game, you need to go up to level 12.
12,
which means
so that's 12 cards each.
Yes, you're
24 cards.
Yes,
in sequence.
Yes,
without talking, just looking at each other's eyes
or communicating, and that's why this game is called The Mind. Is because the idea is that you're like being telepathic, and you're trying to read off the different players and whatnot. And what
John,
actually ends up, yes.
Have you ever won this game?
No, I haven't. So I played it twice at 2-player live on stream with Eric, and we got to level 11 actually before we lost.
Wow!
With our second play, our first play we lost at like level 4. Second play we got up to level 11, which surprised me. Like we were actually really close to getting to level 12. And then I played it a few more times here and there because it was just getting played like crazy at Gamma at higher player counts, which means you only need to get to like level 7 or 8 or 6 depending on how many people are around the table. And no, I never got close. I never got as close to winning as I did that second game. But I will say that this game has emergent playstyle things that are similar to Hanabi. You've played Hanabi before, I'm assuming? Yeah, so Hanabi was a cooperative game that came out in 2009. It won the Spiel des Jahres, and it was a simple game where you cooperatively, collectively have to put these cards down in order. But in that game, you held your cards backwards so that you could see everyone else's cards but your own. And then you had to give certain selective pieces of information to your collaborators around the table.
Okay, but here's the thing, right? In Hanabi, you have you develop codes and stuff like that. Even though you can't communicate, you're like, oh, okay, this means something and that means something. And where I place my cards kind of tells my opponents, where they are. And some people maybe consider that cheating in Hanabi or whatever. But in the Mind, you don't have any of that and you can't do any of that. It's literally just, I'm going to play a number and then you're going to play a number. And all you're doing is really just looking at each other, isn't it?
No.
No, okay.
Actually, this is actually where I was going, is that it's similar to Hanabi. Like you just said, those little quirks that you kind of develop as a group, I found that in the mind, you're doing the same thing. Like you said, some people consider Hanabi to be, cheating to do these kind of little tips and
Mhm.
quirks and like that. In the mind, the same stuff happens and you cannot help yourself. Sure, you're not
Right.
allowed to talk, but you're not just staring in people's eyes. You're reading every single body language movement, the way they're breathing, how fast they're blinking. Like there's all these different things that you're starting to like almost subconsciously read into. And it really is this game of collective chicken because like something as simple as like you're sitting there and then you're like, okay, and you reach to go take a card and then somebody else sees that as a tell and they freak out and then they grab a card and slam it down on the table before you can actually get it down, almost in a little speed race. And more often than not, that was actually a correct move for them to play. So they were like playing chicken in that respect. Also, I've seen games where, like how people are looking or maybe how they're kind of nervously laughing or, how they actually, touch the cards or like how slowly they go to the cards. Like, are they going fast? Because if you start the round and you have the one, then obviously you have to be the very first person, which means you essentially go. And if somebody is like lightning fast, like, well, you're learning a lot right there. Or if they go pretty fast and you have like a 4 and you're like, in that split second, you're like, they're reaching for their card. How likely is it they have the 1, 2, or 3? Because I have the 4, and there's only 20 cards in distribution right now, so I probably have the lowest card.
Mm.
So do I now need to make it even more of a dexterity game and launch over to my card and slam it down on the table before they get theirs down? And is that the right thing to do? And oh, by the way, you're making this calculation in like, a split second.
How many times have you bent cards? Like,
Oh, like a couple times. Actually, live on stream, there were a couple moments where I got really hasty. Like that's another thing. Like since this game is essentially real time, unlike most real time games have a timer that you're going against, whether that be your opponents or a little sand timer on the table. This game is real time, but there is no timer. Like you could hypothetically take literally forever when you're playing this game. And so what that means is you're not really sure where the tempo is. And I found myself getting really excited from an adrenaline perspective in the first and second game where I just like, I play a card and then I go to play the next card and play the next card. Like I get myself into this cycle and maybe the first couple cards were good and the second card wasn't. And there was a couple of cases where Eric saw me doing it and he was like, his eyes like went wide with terror. He grabbed his card and smashed it down on the table, just barely got it under my card. And then we looked down and we're like, oh, phew. Like he played the 42 and I played the 43 or something like that. And, those moments like that were pretty fun. And this comes back to my saying that you can't help but cheat in this game. Like,
okay,
all of these things are hypothetically cheats. And this is essentially why it ends up working more than you would expect because you're not actually just reading each other's minds. Really, you're just reading their bodies.
so 2 things. First of all, Collective Chicken, that's the name I used to dance under. I've been holding that for like 5 minutes now. And the second thing is I'm not sure whether I'm even more disappointed or even more excited because like if okay I watched that live stream. I watched the game where you went up to 11 rounds and my god, it was the most exciting dead air I've ever seen, right? Because none of you were saying anything. You were literally just slamming cards onto the table, or sometimes you would pause and look at each other and then look at your cards and then look at each other again. Then you would look away and think a little bit, and then suddenly a card just goes wham, right? And I'm like, oh my god, like did they do it? Is it the correct sequence? And it was literally so. I've never been so excited watching a live stream, and I wanted. And like the way it looked, like how far you got, like with just like by looking at each other, I was like, this has to be some sort of sorcery, right? And
Yeah.
and I kind of at one point I wanted to be that. And I'm wondering if it is a disappointment that it is just like looking for tells and stuff, or is it actually really exciting? Is it like this sort of like gripping moment of like learning about this person's body language? Is that exciting? I don't know, John. Is that exciting to you?
I think it makes it better.
Okay.
I think it makes it more exciting. I mean, if it was just about, straight up guesswork, then I don't think it would work. Like, I mean, obviously telepathy doesn't actually exist. So,
yeah,
or at least
sure.
maybe it exists, but I'll tell you right now, I am not telepathic. I always want to say telepathetic. And so I think it makes it a better game realistically because it means you're playing off of all these things. And I would say the same thing about Hanabi. Like I think Hanabi is also more fun with these little house rules and these things that come in because it means that you kind of become more skilled in a variety of different ways. And, it's a cooperative game. So you're winning and losing together. So there's a lot of things that go in together. And since it's real time, it is one of those things where even though the decision seems simple, do I go or not? You are constantly thinking, like, is this too much time? Is this not enough time? There've been a couple times where we were playing like a 4-player game, and somebody plays like a 37, and then it's just like silence for like 20 seconds, 30 seconds. At 40 seconds, a couple people start to nervously like touch their cards, but like what they're all starting to collectively realize is they all have really high cards.
Yeah.
Like I'm sitting there and I've got like my next card's like an 87 and we have like a 37 down on the board. Like at what point do I realize that this is actually the lowest? And I'm not going to go into the specifics of it, but there are these little shuriken cards you can use to discard certain cards to give a little bit of information back and forth, and you have only a certain number of those which help. But there was one moment where it was down to 2 people, and one of them was holding the 99 and one of them was holding the 100. And it was just like, when do you break that gridlock? And it was like several minutes. I feel like it probably wasn't, but it felt like
it's not a losing situation, is it? Because the person who has the 100 is just not going to play the card, right?
yes. And so really it's just that other person who is just like, at what point?
Yeah.
At what point do I just and see that is where the cheating kind of comes into play, because there were a couple times I played where I actually did rules lawyer a little bit where I was like, nah, come on, that's giving away way too much information. Where somebody would like play a card and then they would just like put their whole hand down on the table.
Well, that's what
and,
I
like,
would do if
and like
I had 100,
jokingly
right?
look off to the side. Yeah, exactly. And I think if you do that, if you're like telegraphing like I'm not putting a card down for any reason whatsoever, then that does kind of betray the magic of the game to a certain extent. I think there are limits, and the limit is going to be different for every single group. And so for some people, they're fine with like putting the cards down and like comedically, twiddling and whistling. And for other groups, they're not going to want that. And I thought that was maybe going over the line a little bit. Like at least look at your cards and like be you can be distressed with your eyes or something like that. But I feel like
I think in the example you gave though, that's perfectly fine because you know what the outcome is going to be. And do you just want to sit there for 2 minutes? Like if you have the 100 and there's only 2 people, right? One of them has the 100, right? That person knows that they're not going to play the card, and no matter what happens, they're not going to be the person that plays the card. So effectively, you're just, the outcome, no matter what, right? You just, like, how long does this take?
I mean, it kind of, like I said, it depends on your own magic circle that you're playing with, and how much you want to push.
That's
like
pretty
I would
fair.
say that you should just keep holding the cards. And if they look at you with a distressed look, maybe you like raise your eyebrows like
you are cruel,
then
John.
that would be better.
So very
but,
cruel. But I can see your point.
Yeah. Anyway, it was a neat game. It's one of those things where the rules are so simple that I almost want to say it's is it really a game? But this one definitely is. Like it's surprising how much
to hell
comes
with
out
that.
of so little.
Of course, it's a game. A game is whatever you play, right?
Right. And a lot does come out of it. And I think I'd like to play this one more. I played it several times at the convention. I wouldn't say that I'm like breathlessly excited like some people are. But I would certainly play this one more. It's almost like a board game gag gift that works, if that makes sense. Like this, it's a lot of the fun is just realizing how far you actually can get as you're actually playing it. So I know this one is somewhat difficult to find, but also very easy to proxy with like any version of the game, like in quotes, the game, because that one also had 100 cards in it. And I also know that Pandasaurus Games got the rights to it in English. Not that there's any words at all on this game, so I think that one's probably going to be seeing much wider distribution later on.
Okay, that's cool to hear. I can't wait to get my hands on it. If I have access to Amazon Germany, do you think I would be able to order the German version of the game? Let's say, or if I live in Germany, is it still available?
Yes.
Yeah.
I think so. I mean, there's been a lot of fervor about it, so for all I know, maybe it's sold out. But as of a couple weeks ago, what I heard was it was on Amazon.de, but for some reason it wasn't shippable to the United States. But you living in the UK, you'd probably be fine. It wouldn't surprise me if you could pick up a copy.
Okay. Well, it's not just me. It's hopefully members of our audience who are more European based. John, are we looking at questions now?
We are totally going to look at questions. We have just 2 emails in our backlog. Unfortunately, they came in November and December, and it is currently April. So sorry for the huge gap there.
But
these
we
emails
these are the last 2 emails, isn't it? We've
that's true.
Covered
yes.
everything else. So if you have any questions that you might like to ask us, then you should probably go ahead and ask us some questions.
Yeah, the address is lastplacepodcast@gmail.com.
And we will definitely get onto them and reply to them at some point, as soon as we get to them.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Hopefully it won't take 4 months, but we can't make any promises. So the first one is from Seji Kingma. He's from the Netherlands, and I'm sure I just destroyed his name. I'm really sorry about that, Seji. But he wrote us a big email, and it doesn't actually have any questions in it. It's a bit of extra context based off of something we answered a couple podcasts ago relating to playing games with children. Now, what's going on here is he says that he's a proud father, and he's been playing games with his kids since they were really young. Like, he first started at age 3 with like roll and move style games, and then by age 4 he was playing like Carcassonne Junior, and he was already seeing his kids have some semblance of tactical thinking and playing, and that he actually played Settlers of Catan and Citadels with by the time his kid was 5. And I have to be honest, I'm a little bit surprised by that. Like, those games aren't super complicated, and I again have a very small amount of experience with children in general, but that does seem a bit younger than I was expecting. And his thesis, like his ending point, is that you should be creative when playing games with kids, because you never really know how they're going to react. Like, if they'll just play with it like as a toy or actually get into the rules. And I guess he's just saying, as his personal advice to everyone who's asking about playing games with kids, is just try stuff and see what works. And that does seem to be a pretty good point, I think.
I remember when I went to university and was studying creative writing, my head lecturer always tried to reinforce this like main point, that never underestimate the intelligence of your audience. And I find this so relatable because sometimes our audiences are like our big family, and they're like I'm being deliberately I don't know what's the right phrase. I'm being deliberately facetious, I guess. Um, but yeah, no, like, don't underestimate kids, because in that way, if you're playing with them, then they are your audience and they might surprise you. I have certainly at times, like, there were a few times in my life where like I was hanging out with friends who have children, and I'm like, hey, they maybe should try this board game. I remember I gave one of my friends' kids like Ice Cool, and they were like 5 or something, and I thought, look, they're just about the right age to start flicking things, and Ice Cool will be perfect for that. And the kid was excited about flicking things, but they were more excited about just the fact that you could build like these rooms out of this board game, and you could build this school,
Hmm.
right? And it
Yeah.
was almost like a cardboard construction set where you could put penguins in and you could flick them, but like, it's a construction set, right? And that might not be to do with like, oh, this 5-year-old is not, like, grasping this game. It's just that they have clearly a different interest, right? They're more interested in constructing things rather than flicking things, right? And
Yeah.
so I think an important thing might be to consider like how a child approaches the game, and from what angle, and why they're trying to do that. So just because they're playing a game wrong, it doesn't mean necessarily that they're playing the game wrong. In their head, they are engaging with it in the way that is most appealing to them.
Yeah.
So that's something I think to consider. We have one more email from Aaron, but Aaron doesn't just ask one question; he's asking 3 questions because Aaron is greedy. But you know what, Aaron, we'll let it slide, and we'll answer all 3 of your questions. So, question number 1: since John, you live on the other side of the Atlantic, and then on the other side of the America that is on the other side of the Atlantic,
Yep.
do we find it very difficult to schedule this podcast and coordinate it? And I think since we got this email, which was in December, we have basically just answered the question by not answering it, but just by our podcast release schedule.
Yeah, we put out 2 since then. I mean, I
Yeah.
think that it's not really the time zone difference that's the problem for scheduling of making the podcast happen, because we have an 8-hour time difference between the 2 of us.
Mhm.
So, like, this morning we started at 8:30 my time, and it was 4:30 p.m. your time.
Mhm.
And more often than not, it seems like it's more an issue of just what we have happening on these days, because you're a total night owl. Like I've been online chatting with you before, and I'm like, wait a second, isn't it like 3 in the morning for you? And you're like, yes, I
Yeah.
should go to sleep. So
I am most productive at night, so I guess this is a little insight into my lifestyle. When I wake up in the morning, and I still actually try and wake up as early as I can. It might not be. Some people might be jealous of my schedule and waking up. You know what they consider like pretty late, like 9 o'clock or something like that. Uh, but I just can't function in the morning. I think if I had a regular job, I would crave for a job where I could like still have like normal working hours, but would like actually work later, because I'm most productive when it comes to the evening, and I'm like at my peak sometimes at about 10 or 12 or something like that. I'm like, all right, I'm getting on with things, you know, I'm doing stuff. And I've been like that all my life, so yeah.
yeah. So I think the time zone hasn't really been a problem. Honestly, it's kind of nice because more often than not, when we're doing this, it hasn't happened just yet. But we'll be recording this, and we'll come near to the end of it, and then Elaine will come home from work, and I can say hi to Elaine on Skype, and like I think the time zone actually works out pretty well because I start my day off. I wake up and I'm like, okay, we're recording the podcast today. I'm going to record the podcast and then be productive. And for you, we start recording the podcast around 4:30 or 5 p.m. After which you've had a lot of productivity that day. So really, the delays are just because life happens. And
Hmm.
like we were going to record this like 2 weeks ago, and it was like, well, we're going to do it next Tuesday. And like, oh, this thing came up. Okay, we'll kick it back a few days. Then we'll kick it back a few days. And now here we are a couple weeks later, and we're finally getting it done. We wanted to do this with the start of the Kickstarter campaign that you're doing for the channel,
Yeah.
but that's just the way it works. More often than not, like we don't think about recording again for another 2 to 3 weeks, and then it takes us another 2 to 3 weeks to actually find a time to work. But that is the longer version of answering that question than we probably needed to do.
Talking of Elaine, I see her walking through the window. She's
Yay!
just coming home.
Cool. All right. So the next question is from Aaron. He says, I was looking over my game collection and noticed there doesn't seem to be one single publisher whose games I own more than any of the others. They say, what about the both of you? Is there a publisher that you find is producing games that more often than not align with your tastes?
Do you know what? The answer for me is probably Fantasy Flight Games. Because not because necessarily like the type of games they make most align with my tastes, but probably just because of the quality of the final product, the polish, not just on the components or whatever, or the appealing theme. You know, they really do put in a lot of effort to making sure that the mechanisms for whatever type of game it is are as good as they can be, right?
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. I mean, for me, I think I'm more on Aaron's side of things. I've been thinking about it, and I don't think I really get excited about one particular publisher or
Hmm.
another. I mean, I think it's, for me, a lot more important who the designer is, and a lot of designers work with lots of different publishers. I will say that there are some publishers where I feel like I've never really played a game I liked that much from them, but
Mm.
the flip side is nothing's really sticking out where I'm like, oh, X publisher is putting something out, I've got to try it. It's much more like, oh, X designer is putting out a new thing. Well, now I'm super intrigued because of that.
Well, that's the funny thing about Fantasy Flight is that oftentimes the designer's name isn't as important as the fact that it's published by Fantasy Flight Games. I feel like that's an exception in this industry because I think their approach to design is that they're a design house
Yeah.
rather than like this is a specific designer. And then sometimes they will take on a design and then kind of master it, I guess would be the most appropriate term. But they are a design house.
Yeah, that is a good point. Like I think they do bring in outside designers maybe occasionally, but for the most part, it's a lot more development there as opposed to most publishers where they take a design from a designer and it's less hands-on. I mean, I think most publishers do some development, but with Fantasy Flight, they do pretty much all of it. And for me, it's not Fantasy Flight because I don't know. I've liked some Fantasy Flight games, but in general, I don't particularly care about what they have coming out next at any given moment. So yeah, that's just more my thing about being less of a thematic gamer, I suppose.
Hmm. And why on earth can't there be a good game based on the Godzilla IP? and there's even a pun. The potential seems giant monster huge.
If it wasn't obvious, this is question number 3. This isn't Efka
Yes.
just like going off on a strange random tangent.
Which I do, so wouldn't be a new thing. No, I don't know. I have never been one that's been into the whole Godzilla or Gojira. I don't know. Yeah, I've never been enamored by it. But have you?
I mean, I guess it depends on what you mean by a decent game. I mean, you and I are for the most part Euro gamers. I'm more of a Euro gamer than you are. So
Mhm.
a Euro game with Godzilla as a theme doesn't seem to make a lot of sense. Like a Godzilla theme with a giant monster destroying cities, it's probably going to be maybe a dexterity game or like something much more like a light card game or thematic kind of experience, which some people are probably going to think is decent. Like that's a crazy thing about board games is like there's every game that gets made has an audience. Just depends on how big that audience is, and so I think maybe just for some reason a decent one hasn't been made that you like, Aaron, and maybe they'll end up getting to it, or maybe not. I mean, I don't think that many people are super excited about Godzilla as a IP at this point.
But that was a trick question because there's actually another question tacked on to that question. So
what?
actually, Aaron snuck in 4 questions. What is the IP, John, that you think is ripe for the picking and hasn't been given the treatment it deserves?
I think, have we answered this one on the podcast before?
I've answered it on my live Q&A, and I can tell you what mine is right now. It's Ubik. It's Philip K. Dick's Ubik as a social deduction game.
Okay. Yeah, honestly, I am not much of an IP style person. Like I'm not really a media nerd kind of person. Like I watch some Netflix and I watch some movies, but I don't really follow this stuff that much, so I don't get particularly invested with IPs for the most part. I think if I've answered this one before, which I might have, I probably mentioned the Malazan series of books, which is a 10-book ridiculous fantasy series with thousands of characters, and every single page is over 1,000 page long.
That's almost too many books. Are there even that many books in the world? 10 sounds like a lot.
There are. It took me years to read the whole series because every book is over 1,000 pages long.
Oh my word!
It's incredible, but it's one of the coolest fictional experiences I've had reading through that whole series, and there's pretty much nothing that's ever been made for it. So I would love if a board game came out with that IP. I would probably get it no matter what. Like even if it was a social deduction game, which I hate, I would probably still get it just because of that. Because I am personally attached to so few IPs, but that's one that I really like.
Well, Aaron, I think that's your answer. And before this podcast goes to being about 1,000 pages long, I'd say let's say goodbye to our listeners and end it right here. I've been Efka.
And I've been John. And don't forget to send questions to lastplacepodcast@gmail.com. We're officially out, and we'll try not to have it be 4 months until we answer yours again.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much. Have a good one.
Bye-bye.